And I did post this link into our meetups channel here. And so this is our URUG meetups. If anybody's not on the Slack, anyway, we post all these things here. Okay. So just a quick primer. So today, I'm going to be presenting on this new Ruby-based game library that just kind of got released about a week or two ago, from what I know. Maybe a little bit before that, they've been working on it. But before I do that, so I'll probably plan on taking nearly an hour. I can go shorter if we need to, or longer if we have time to fill. But I think I'll probably do that, and then we'll have a little bit of time for either lightning talks or a career discussion if you want to do something like that after. So I'll try and keep mine a little bit more condensed if there's some interest in that. So I want to talk about that a little bit. I'm actually glad we have two music people in here, because I'm going to have a little bit of introduction to a project I did, which was using Ruby to write music as part of this activity as well. So it'll be kind of interesting to at least two of you. So that'll be good. So anyways, so I wanted to introduce you today to this thing called DragonRuby Game Toolkit, and it's kind of interesting. There's just these two guys, and I don't mean to downplay that or belittle them at all, but these two guys behind it, this guy named Brian Gordon. He's actually a pretty big guy in the game industry. He wrote this thing called Simple Direct Media Layer, and that doesn't mean much to a lot of people, but it's a low-level C library that handles a lot of the underlying things that many of the popular game engines use. Okay, so anyway, he's kind of bringing that side of it, and then there's this Amir Rajan, and he's kind of the guy behind Ruby Motion. Has anyone here worked with Ruby Motion at all? Okay. And he also made this game called A Dark Room, which was free web-based, but then ported onto mobile devices, and now is on Nintendo Switch. Until about 2 days ago, it just got pulled off. But
because he had the console built into it or something.
Yeah, exactly. He built in a Ruby IDE into it as kind of an Easter egg, and forgot the one rule of publishing to a closed source game center, that is, keep the secrets from your end users, but not from your publishers. So, I think he got himself in a little bit of trouble over that, but no, I don't know enough about it. I just read the blog posts, and, but anyway, so yeah, he his whole thing in there was, trying to create an interactive console so that students or kids on a Switch could get some exposure to programming, which is actually a big part of the reason why I'm into this project at all. And I've only recently downloaded it about a week ago and have been playing with it. But I do believe game programming is a wonderful way to introduce students and young minds to the world of programming in general. And so there's that. I'm kind of going to take this with a little bit of that focus, and I recognize there's probably people in here who know more about this than I do, but that's okay. And so it's really quite interesting. So yeah, this is kind of it. They've published this thing called DragonRuby Game Toolkit, and the whole premise behind it is it's a very simple game engine. That's it, that you can use Ruby to write and do things. And at the end of the day, a game engine is nothing more than a single method that gets called in cycles time and time again. So we'll walk through kind of their brief primer on it. You can go through that and see that later. And we'll walk through kind of some of their examples. And I want to do some comparisons to, has anyone ever heard of the library Gosu? It's another Ruby-based game library. I'll pull that up and kind of do some comparisons on it. But the thing I actually like about the premise of this DragonRuby game toolkit is you can cross-platform publish to things, which is kind of cool. So in it, you can actually export your code as executable Windows, Linux, or Mac OS files that are portable, right? Anybody can install those on whatever OS they're on. They're also working on, it's also, so the main guy, Ajir, behind this also exported it. So he built the Darkroom. Did I say that right? Yeah. Darkroom and published it on the Switch via this same toolkit as well, right? So he said it's been able to be published onto PS4, Xbox, and Switch as well. The only challenge is those aren't readily available publicly because those are closed source systems that you have to go through Nintendo's or Sony's terms of service and all of that. But anyway, he says if you're interested in that, contact him and he'll help you figure out how to publish onto those platforms, kind of in a more private setting than public at the moment. Okay. The other thing that was kind of interesting, so they do have a Slack group. It's actually, these guys came from the Ruby Motion project, and I had done some Ruby Motion stuff before. I did a few things, like we built, so I mentioned I've done a lot of things in mobile in the past, and that started way back in 2009, getting into native apps then, using things like Cordova and PhoneGap for a lot more of the light mobile apps that people needed. And I followed a lot of those projects along the way. We did a pretty big one in Ruby Motion, and the lesson learned out of Ruby Motion is it's a great way for Rubyists to get introduced to the iOS and Android SDKs. Most of mobile development anymore is working with those SDKs. And since the advent of an introduction of Swift with iOS, there's really not a lot of reason. Like Swift is a pretty nice language. It's kind of the bastard child of JavaScript and Ruby, in my opinion, in many ways. Anyway, yeah, the lesson we learned after doing a pretty big Ruby Motion build was, wow, that was a clever way to do things that we probably should have just done in Xcode and in Java and that, but it was very approachable for us and a good way to get started on it. The Android side of it was really quite weak on the support side because it was still very alpha quality. We found out that we were pioneers in that space, and so about midway through the project, we ended up converting to just normal Android stuff because it was a lot easier to be able to use Stack Overflow than have to go into debugging source code and whatnot. So anyways, so the reason I brought this up is they have this Slack channel as well that's tapping into the Ruby Motion one, but this Ryan Gordon, he just published a thing of him getting this game up and running on his Raspberry Pi emulation station as well, which I thought was kind of cool because I happened to build a big old arcade cabinet for my kids for Christmas this year, so I'm kind of interested in it. But anyway, this is a video of him getting it working on his Raspberry Pi RetroPie setup. This is kind of one of these demo games. We're going to run through it a little bit today as well. But that's the point, right? So today we're going to explore kind of this game that they've been publishing out there as a starting point. Flappy Dragon, like Flappy Bird, but a dragon. So anyways, that's kind of a little bit behind that, and why I think this project is interesting is because of the true cross-platform publishability, where many of the other ones I've used in the past really don't have that, unless you're going to go Unity and Unreal, which are the de facto, game building tools out there. But that's all C++. And technically maybe some Node or some JavaScript in some of that, but typically C++ and getting into true game development. But as Rubyists, we're more scripters or web developers, and so, we'll explore this one. So that's kind of a primer on it. The whole premise behind this is that actually, I'm going to just walk through this a little bit. Let's see. Okay. Give me 1 second. All right, I'm just going to pull this up here so you can see that easy enough. And I probably ought to switch themes. Not that I really know the themes on this all that well. 1 second. There we go. Let's go white. Oh, let me go white rather than black because it's quite bright in here. All right, that'll be better. Okay, so the whole premise behind a game is this is who here's ever built a game before? Yes, absolutely. You did in QBasic, cool. Yeah. So building games. Who has ever built mobile apps before, or integrated systems apps, or anything like that? Okay. Okay. So it's much more cyclical programming than it is just straight through passive programming is kind of how I would describe that, right? The purpose of a game is the engine will just repeat something continuously until it has no reason to anymore, right? It's cyclical in nature, and so you tap into that cycle and you define entrance points and exit points and stages and levels and other things around it, but at the end of the day, it's a cyclical loop that never stops until powered off is kind of the notion behind it, right? So at the base of it, they'll explain, actually I'll go through the README here because it's kind of interesting. But basically, in its simplest sense, the entire game is going to happen under a single function that runs 60 times a second for 60 frames per second, right? This is an engine for 2D games. It's not an engine for 3D games. If you're trying to build a 3D game, go with Unreal or Unity. That is the de facto way of doing it, but that's not the point today. So basically, a game engine runs a single function so many times per second, depending on how many frames per second you're trying to do. In this case, with the 2D game with a modern computer, 60 frames per second is not going to be an obstacle, okay? So the entire engine just uses a single Ruby method called tick that takes arguments and does things, okay? So in its simplest sense, I'll go ahead and start here with it. We can do something like this. Let's see. Run DragonRuby, and this is running, and we have hello world that's being drawn 60 times per second right now. Okay.
You're a game developer.
I'm a game developer. Done. Yes. Okay. So that's kind of the idea behind it. You define this function tick, which gets called by the engine 60 times a second, and that's it. Easy enough. So with that, there's more that you can do. You can add labels like we just saw. And the thing that's kind of nice about this DragonRuby thing is it'll hot reload a lot of your stuff without needing to recompile every time, which is kind of nice. And by default, it'll just assume 1280 by 720. Then it'll upscale and downscale appropriately based off of resolution size at publishing time. So it's really taking away a lot of that setup stuff that you might typically run into when working with a more real game. So that said, I can just edit that on the fly, and I can say, great, we want a label, which is text. We want to, here's our XY coordinates, and here's what we're going to say. We have a sprite that we want to output. Here's our XY coordinates. Here's the size of the image, and here's the relative path to that image. There's that DragonRuby RB, and it's going to draw that on the screen. You can see here we can move this stuff around, and there it goes, moved around, right? So that's kind of the idea there. And so with that, here, let's see what this one here is doing. Okay. So similarly, okay, this is the one that shipped with it, saying, hey, if you made it here, try reading the README text because that'll teach you more about it. So anyways, what's going to happen is you can define some other things like a rotation method. This is basically just a way for us to define variables that we can just tie to the game itself, okay? So we can say, great, let's start it at 0. Then every tick that happens, it's going to rotate that and subtract 1 from it. So we're going to start rotating, I would imagine counterclockwise, that logo there, right? And there it goes. That was clockwise. All right. But anyways, similarly, if we were to plus it, there it goes and switches the other direction, right? So it's just getting 1 degree per second there, or per whatever, 60th of a second there, and rotating around, okay? So if someone were being smart about that, they'd say, great, that'll complete a full circle in 6 seconds, because 6 times 60 is 360, right? Okay. So we are now game developers, and that is nice. It has a lot more built into it. It has inputs and it has outputs that you can do. So you can actually define any number of inputs here. They standard support keyboards, mice, joysticks, gamepads. They actually have some sample games that you can play, like if you plugged in a USB gamepad of any kind, a SNES controller or a PlayStation controller or whatnot. You can work with that. So they have this thing here. We drew this image. Let's now take it so that when we click a mouse, it's going to take those things, subtract the dimensions of this image, and it's going to move that image around depending on where we click. And I'm going to kind of hand wave past some of this stuff. So quick aside, I nearly ripped my finger off about 2 months ago in a four-wheeler winch, and so when you see me typing funny and making typos, it's only because I can't use my thumb. Okay, it is on its way to recovery. Maybe a few more weeks, and I'm in good shape. So, anyways, if anyone wants to see a horror story with pictures, it's quite entertaining. But anyway, so based on where we click, we can now move an object around, and it's plotting it on the mouse. So you can actually see here in the little console I have running that it's plotting the XY coordinates of the mouse click, and it's telling us the current one and the previous one where we came from, okay? All right, so they're handling some of that basic game engine stuff for us. Input events, positioning, rendering, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So anyway, I'm not going to go too crazy through this. They have some nice things in here that I just got working today, which was kind of like, has anybody heard of this service called itch.io? It's basically Steam for open source indie developers is kind of the idea, where they'll allow you to publish your games to it, and they'll handle payments for you and give you a cut of that and do a lot of that stuff. So I was just playing with it, and I'll show you kind of how that works. But they've built in this publish method where you can publish locally or you can publish your games directly to this, which is exactly what I wanted when it comes to, I'm going to teach my nephew or my daughter to code and get them a game that they can take home with them at the end of the day, right? The challenge with a lot of these game engines and environments that are out there is it's very local and very specific to your dev build, and that's not that portable and not that easy, you know? Or it's a web-based JavaScript one, and JavaScript is a great language. It's not really the best language for a 6 or 8 or 10-year-old. It's a little bit too expressive is probably the right word. So I do favor more of like a Ruby for something like that, which is a bit more forgiving when it comes to things like parentheses and commas and closing curlies and things like that when working with that. But anyway, I'll show you this here in a little bit as we go. But I did just get that set up and working today, which was kind of cool. And full disclosure, I literally bought this like a few days ago. I'd heard about it like 2 weeks ago and bought it maybe a week ago and just started playing with it over the weekend. But it was very quick to get into and figure some things out. So we're going to do a little bit of that today, okay? So with that, anyways, I want to show you really quickly some of the various samples that they have and just kind of walk through some of those. So I'm just going to go top to bottom. So they're showing here that yes, you can actually do animations and sequences and things. That was an example of the Doom when you got killed and the whole blood thing happened, right? Like it can handle animations, right? That's all that's meant to be. But they do have kind of the whole like source code behind that, how that's working, and you can see great. Again, they just have a tick argument, and I'm not going to walk through all that code. I'll let you guys check that stuff out later. But anyways, they're basically going around for a set interval of time and then drawing an animation scene at the end of it, okay? And so they have this Flappy Dragon one. That's the one that I showed you on his Raspberry Pi arcade setup. Let's see. Okay, so this is it, where you can do Flappy Bird with the dragon. We're going to hack that a little bit today and show you just kind of how easy it is to do this stuff. But anyway, it works about like you expect a Flappy Bird clone to work, right? Okay. And so that's kind of that. That's the one I'm working on. Golf with musical notes. I don't really know much about that. Oh yeah, let me show you one thing first, actually. So they have this tech demo that's really just kind of showing off all the various components of DragonRuby and what it can do. So it's telling you that you can use different labels with different sizes. You can draw lines. You can draw solids with alphas. You can draw squares with. This is kind of our cheat sheet because documentation is still young and lacking, like any good new project. But you can work with sprites or images. You can do transitions and animations and fades and things like that. Here's kind of our tick count happening. So again, that's counting the frames per second as we go. You can see on here, like if I push H on the keyboard, it'll say great, H was pressed at that. If I were to plug in a USB controller, I didn't bring one today because I have plenty of other stuff to talk about. It'll say that, same thing where you're clicking on the mouse. It can detect, great, you clicked inside the box versus outside the box, inside the red box. And it can detect intersections, collisions, things like that. Those are all necessary when building any type of a game, because if you want to build a Mario where you jump on the guy's head, you need to know if your line's path to cue the kill sound or cue the score going up or whatever you're wanting to do, right? It does have some animations. It can write to file. This isn't an example of a render target over here where we're taking what's happening over here and mirroring it over there. So if you wanted to build a scene where you had a guy watching you on closed circuit TV or something and export what you were actually doing, I don't know the right practical example. You could do things like that. Toggle the grid lines to kind of see intersection points so that you kind of know how their plotting is working, et cetera, et cetera. So that's your kitchen sink, okay? Which is kind of interesting. They've built like simple thing here for the musicians in the room. This is a golf. What did they call it? Golf with musical notes. I think the note is good. Good. Okay. You're good.
Just get one wrong.
All right. I think this note's let me ask one of the non-musical guys. F. Okay. All right. Man, you guys are good. Good. Man, you guys did pretty good. Yeah. Did pretty good. All right. So anyway, sound detection, trigger events, all of that stuff. A guessing game is what it provided there, right? Kind of interesting. The whole point there is there's a sample that you can figure out how to play audio with, right? And that's what we're looking at there. So you can take a look at that, and at the end of the day, again, they just have a tick that gets run, and it says, great, let's call the default, set those, then has render events for things that are drawing on the screen, it has calculations for when things are getting ran, et cetera, has various wave files for those various sounds, A, B, C, D, don't look at those, but you understand the point. Okay. Pong. Okay, I don't know how to control this. I've never tried it. Maybe I need game pads. I don't think so. I think I need joysticks plugged in. You can imagine how cool it would be. Let's take a look and see what it says. I haven't tried that one yet, in all honesty. let's see, inputs, yeah, controller 1 and controller 2. You need up and down keys on the controllers. We could hack this and say, great, keyboard, okay. Oh yeah, look at that.
Who's gonna win?
Probably that other guy. I'm doing pretty good so far though. But I can. No, I can't. Not on this particular one. They do have events for that, a key down versus a key up event and things like that, right? All right, here we go. Gonna get it. Oh, yeah. That's the game-winning shot, right? Well, the game-tying shot. Anyway. But again, rendering things, detecting collisions, all those things that you would need. You can take a look at that. Again, it just has a single tick function. Now this one, they've object-oriented. I'm verbing that, but that's fine. They've created a Pong class, which is the entire game right here, and they've basically set a very hacky global variable to Pong and said that there, and then just defined it and destructured all of that. But anyways, they have things that happen when the round needs reset. It sends the ball back to the middle, and then does whatever it does, right? Sets some movement things, etc. So they have this like space one. This one you need game pads to play on, but you could do a left and a right, and it looks like it's asteroids against each other. I'm guessing. I'm not really sure. Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of the idea behind it. So, oh yeah, one last one. Tic-tac-toe demo, right? Easy as it gets. Okay, I drew apparently. There we go. All right. So again, for anyone who's gone through those various code kata things where you have to build a tic-tac-toe machine, you can see how to do that as well, right? So anyways, they're certainly adding a lot more samples and things and growing the documentation on it. But the point is, it's kind of interesting. So what I wanted to do here is introduce a couple of things. So first off, we have this Flappy Dragon game, and I started doing a few things to it. Let me take a look at time. Okay. So let's take a look at this Flappy Dragon again, right? So this is kind of working where we have Flappy Bird, and it's okay. It's kind of lacking sound and things like that. So I started looking at that and going, great. Best way to learn is by hacking something else, then we can build our own thing. Now we know how the components work and go forward. About 2 years ago, I did a similar presentation on one with Gosu. I'm going to show you the super awesome Gosu game that we built back then. And it was a similar thing where we had a start class, which would basically call the game. We had defined a few different things where this was our main game thing. And rather than tick, they had a thing called update, which was the exact same thing. So, if they push left or right or up or down, it would move a player. It would call methods on the player to do things. It would also move projectiles so that if you shot something, it would move out. Anyway, I'll show you very briefly the game that we built. It's amazing. This is called Mario in Space, shooting Hadoukens, flying birds. That got really loud. And you can just do that. It's like asteroids, have all kinds of good trademarks, copyright rules that I'm breaking here, and that's exactly the point. So with my daughters, I said, oh, let's get Minnie Mouse in there, We can shoot Minnie Mouse out, and this is my special Hadouken that lasts a few seconds for screen. I only get one like every 5 levels or something like that. Anyway, so we built this awesome game with gravity, where it does decelerate over time. When you shoot, it'll send you backwards just slightly so you can't understand the players, etc. I did a lot of this with like my kids, just teaching them basic things like, or with nephews and things like that. Like, well, so I had like, I grabbed a picture of my nephew and cut him out and said, let's make you the player, right? So he turned into, let's see, where do we got Mario? Okay. And then I got my other nephew and was like, all right, let's have you record some sound. And now all of a sudden, like, all of a sudden I did sound wrong. All right, fine. You know, he's in the game shooting Hadokens now. Anyway, it's a good way to kind of get people into it and understand, oh, I can just hack around and do some fun things on this, right? So that's kind of what we're going to do. I did that with my daughters, with Peppa Pig, and, you know, what else did we do? Yeah, we'd created that monster sprite where it just loops through those frames, and that's how he's flying. Etc. You know, so it's kind of a fun way to introduce people to the world of programming through games, because the best part about it is there's an instant feedback loop that you don't have in other programming environments. That's what I like a lot about it. That's one of the arguments for learning JavaScript as one of your first programming languages, is because typically you have a web output, which is an instant feedback loop, which is really quite important when you're learning something, you know. All right, so that was our super awesome game that we built last time. And we literally built that whole thing just as a group here in about an hour, right? But it was fun. We expanded on it, did some things. Okay, so today we're going to play a little bit with Flappy Dragon here and take a look at how it's working. So again, we have a Flappy Dragon object here. It has its own tick method. It's going to assign some things that can be used just as normal variables. And at the very bottom of this file, we're just invoking it and running it. We're calling that main tick thing and saying, great, here's Flappy Dragon. Let's assign the grid. Let's assign the inputs. Let's assign the game. Let's assign the outputs. And then let's call tick on it. Because at the end of the day, yeah, we're still calling that same thing. Okay. So the tick method will run a few methods. It'll set all the defaults initially, and not do anything if it's changed. It'll render a few things. It's going to render the background, which again is just taking all these things we just saw. So here's some sprites of a background. There's a parallax left and middle, or front, back, and middle that run at different speeds. They have this method called scrolling background that they've defined, which basically just takes an image and based on the amount of ticks, it times it by that rate we passed in and moves that, right? And so let's see here. Okay, so that's like that parallax background thing moving. You can see the moon moves, well, the moon doesn't move, but the clouds move slower than the mountains, than the shrubs, right? All right. The game's still kind of boring, and it's actually ridiculously hard. The gravity is pretty low. It's pretty hard to get past like 6 points, So anyway, let's hack that a little bit and figure out what's going on. Okay. But one of the very first things I was thinking was, man, we need some sound in here, right? So I told you a little bit about this music project I did. A few years back, I did this thing at Mountain West Ruby Conf where I introduced this music. I wrote a music theory gem, which is basically we're creating sound waves programmatically. So starting with literally nothing and generating every line and plot on a sound wave and playing this stuff. Anyway, I want to fast forward past a lot of that and basically only show you one thing. So I want to move quickly here. But ultimately, we wrote some code which we could write arpeggios. We could transpose things together. I'm going to show you just a basic song that we could do where we could define melodies and combine them all together, and we could use different scales and use some normal chord progressions. And we wrote a thing in this Ruby comp where we wrote a song that was catatonic, meaning it rebuilds itself every single time we run it, which was kind of interesting because if you do music theory right, that should kind of work. Music theory exists for a reason. Well, that doesn't mean it's always going to be pleasing to the ear, but it will be in harmony, correct? If we're following standard progressions and things like that. Okay, so I want to show you just really quickly what we did here, and I'm going to use just the output of that. So here's like a song that we wrote using Ruby. Let's see here. So this is like the melody happening here, transposing it and doing things. And I was sitting here going, I like combining all of these creative projects into one. It's kind of fun, right? So it's kind of cool. So you can do things like, this is all just Ruby, so I can do something like, let's rotate this 6 steps or something like that. Or let's like shuffle this, and this is going to sound horrible, but I'll show you how it works. All right. Oh, you know what? I actually need to come. Sorry. Oops. Let me try that one again. Ah. Yeah, Sonic Pi is what it's called. So that's my new melody. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Like just using Ruby to do kind of this stuff. Not horrible sounding, despite it being random, right? And things like that. So anyway, so what I wanted to do with that is say, okay, cool, let's take that song we built and plug it into like this here. Let's see, 8 o'clock. So let me come back. Whoops. If anyone's interested in that music theory stuff, I can post a link to kind of what I did there. It's quite fascinating just to, you know, understand how that's working, how we can create single notes and scales, and from scales create chords, and from chords create thirds and arpeggios, and all the building blocks of, you know, the old circle of fifths chart that you might have learned in music school or whatnot. Build progressions and transpose things on top of each other, and ultimately it's just creating waveforms that we then just stick through a player and it goes, right? Which is kind of interesting. So anyways, that's a total aside, but okay. So we have this method here. Let's say we wanted to get audio. So I went ahead and just stuck a few different files into the sounds directory here, and looking at that whole golf with musical notes one, I was just looking there and seeing, okay, great. They have a sound that they just add to output.sounds, and it gets played if we do that, okay? So that's kind of interesting. So with that, we could just create something like play background music method. That would do outputs.sound. Was it sound or sounds? Sound, I forget. Okay. Which, as you can, which just starts as an empty array. And so then all we need to do on that is just add a path to, in this case, it's going to be a wave file. So I have this Ruby music wave. And now this gets interesting. So if we wanted to just play that, we could just say, great, let's call that every time we call the render method, for example. This is going to be a mistake, but I'm going to show you the mistake because it's kind of interesting. Okay. Now the challenge is I'm starting the song on every frame, so I'm starting the song 60 times a second right now, which is kind of ethereal. You kind of hear it starting to overlap back in there, right? I'm sure I would probably break somebody's machine. All right, but we got sound coming through, so that's kind of interesting. So again, this is all just Ruby, so we could figure out, well, great. Game music started, like let's define a new variable that's like music started variable and just set it to false. So we could say something like if game.music started, and rather than if, let's try unless. So unless it started, then let's add that and do it once, and then set game.music started to true. Seems kind of sensible, right? Run that again, and all right, now it's just playing once. Okay. So that's better, right? All right, now our dragon needs some awesome sounds. Let me actually just see what sounds I have in here, because I loaded a few in there from that other project. Samples, Flappy Dragon, sounds. All right, this is what I'm working with. Got that Ruby music, got a fireball sound, got Hadoukens, Mega Man death sound. I think we have a game over method here. Let's add a Mega Man death sound when you die. How's that? So they have a method that detects whether you've died or not. We're just going to tap right into that. So looks like they have an early return unless game over. So let's just do that right here. Outputs, sounds, outputs or output? I forget. Outputs, yes. Okay. Sounds dash death dot wave. I guess I don't need to restart this every time. All right, pretty good, right? Okay. So do you remember in my last game? That's pretty good, right? Now, the thing about a game engine is it's only as limited as like your own creativity. You can really do anything you want. You just don't know what you should do or where to start is kind of where it all comes down to, right? So in that last game, I built this notion of like, well, let's map a different key to like do a special move or something like that, right? I think we should do that same thing here. So let's call something like a special move. Special moves, and we'll set it to start at 0. And I actually want to show, I'm going to get that for a second. I actually want to show how many special moves you accumulate just here next to score for now. So let's go through and find that place where we're writing to the screen. Okay, so here's a render score method here. Let's just tap into the same thing. It's like those are spaced 30 apart, so we'll try 30 more and call this special moves, which is just going to plot out the number of special moves we have. Okay, so now that's being plotted out. All right, cool. Doesn't do anything yet. Now, Flappy Dragon, rather, you have these pillars you have to cross. Well, what if, like, since I'm a dragon, I could, like, just blow up one of those pillars and not have to cross it? That would be a good, like, special move, I think. All right. We could do something there that's like, okay, how do I earn a special move? Well, for now, let's just give ourselves one to start. And let's create a new method here that's like destroy wall. We'll give it a bank because it's destructive. All right, let's figure out how the walls work. So there's all these walls. And it looks like if we cross through the gap and pass them, then they'll get removed. And it'll add 1 point to our score. And it'll remove however remaining walls there are, and it'll create a new one basically so that we keep getting walls, right? More or less. Okay. So walls is just an array of these wall objects. Okay. So one would think that I could just be like, when I call destroy walls, let's just say it's just an array, so let's just remove the very first one from there. I don't know how many is going to be in there. So let's just reset walls to kick out the 0 index one and grab one till the end of them. Like, that's a good enumerable way of doing this, right? Good Ruby way of doing that. And now I need some way to call destroy wall. So where's our inputs for keyboard? There it is. Okay. So right now this is saying return unless somebody pushes space. So if it's not space, do nothing. I want to do a new thing now. If space, do that. I probably don't need an else because I guess I could push them simultaneously. Let's map a new key. In fact, we could even just map the mouse even, so I have to click to use the special, right? Probably be better if I used enter or something, but let's explore this thing. So what did I call that thing? Destroy wall with a bang. Okay. Wait, what did I do? Oh yeah, click. Boom. Yeah, look at that. It's gone just by me clicking. All right, let's get some music going. Okay, so right now I have unlimited wall destroying capabilities. I can just click until there's no malls. I'm not getting any points because I'm not crossing through any of them. But if I'm in the wrong spot, I can panic, destroy a wall, and the cheater in me likes that. Okay. All right, so we need some way to... Oh, notice my sound stopped. I didn't loop it after it had finished playing at all. So it just kind of stopped and never looped again. We could figure out like a background looping method later, but...
So is your output sound just in still sound?
Yeah. Yes. And we just push it onto it, and when it runs, then it clears based off of the game engine itself, right?
Unless output sounds includes then.
Yeah, and we can try that. I don't know how long output sounds keeps things in there at all. So let's take a look. Let's inspect that real quick and just output that to see, right? Let's try that for a second. Okay. Oh, but I only outputted it once. Is it still there after the first tick? I want to change that. Nope, it was only ever in there once. When it played, and it was done, it doesn't care how long that sound was, right? So I don't know enough about their game engine to know if they have loops or anything like that, but I do know enough about Ruby that we could just invent our own things. So we could do something like, let's see, what do we have as far as time goes? Yeah, this tick count. Hold on. Let's cheat here for a second and put our tick count. See what's happening there. It's just rendering every tick, right? So if that's 60 a second, we could do something. Just cheat, because that's what we do. How long is this? 31 seconds. So we could do something like, yeah, something like that. After 30 seconds elapses, then restart it again or something like that. Yeah, we could do that. After, let's see. Say that again. Yeah, we could do that. Okay. So game tick count divided by 60 should equal seconds, right? So elapsed seconds. I'll encapsulate that. So then what? Let's see. If elapsed seconds is greater than, that's a bad idea, is greater than 30, I'm just going to set that length here once. Length equals 31. If elapsed seconds is greater than length. Length is a horrible variable name. Song length, okay. Then what do you think? Set that to false. That'll continue to call. On the conditional?
Running that 60.
Yeah, so every whatever, then game.music started equals false. Yeah, that's a pretty smart way of doing that. I like that. Still outputting it. I should have picked a shorter value so I didn't have to wait 30 seconds. We'll wait it out. We got this. Okay, so that's the end. Yeah, it restarted. Okay, good. We've built an auto loop. Whether or not the engine has one, it does now, right? All right. So yeah, if we were smarter, we could extract that into some auto loop method that could just take any file name and build something to detect the note or something. Oh, they gotta do that. That's gonna be obnoxious for a minute. Okay, so cool. So we have background music going there. It's now looping. We solved that problem with just Ruby. All right, so I have this destroy method that I was calling there. Now, this needs some permissions around it. So can destroy, let's make a method called try to destroy wall. It basically says if game.special moves is greater than 1, then let's call destroy wall, and let's reduce a move when we do it, right? We have to be able to burn those special moves. And instead of calling destroy wall directly, we'll now call try to destroy wall and try that again. All right, see my special moves? What did I do? Click and play. Boom. Boom. But now I can't do it anymore. Oh, okay. And I didn't give myself any more to start with. So we could do a couple of things. We could go to, they had a reset or something like that. Let's see, where is it resetting all of that stuff? Game over, blah, 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 blah. Okay, on a game over, it's going to reset the score to 0. We could also reset our special moves to 2, right? And if we were smarter, we'd define some sort of a variable that keeps those things intact so we could change it in one place, but we're not going to worry about that for now. All right. Boom, boom. Okay, restarted, and I have 2 more, right? All right, that's pretty good. But now we need the ability to accumulate special moves by achieving them, because otherwise what's the point of ever only having 2? So we could tie that to time. We could tie that to score. Score? Okay. Yeah, okay. So every 4 pillars you get a special move. So here's our scoring mechanism. I'm just going to score modulus 4, then it would give it 1 more. We could try that. Special moves +1. If, wait. Okay, let's try that. I know exactly what that's going to do. It's going to be awesome.
It's equal to 0.
Thank you. These are all just things. Thank you. Yeah, that's the thumb.
Oh, nice.
I just,
Oh, 0, Larry.
I'm going to kill this game right now. So the problem is it's still running every frame, right? But now, look, I can get more. If I were really good, I would just like use these forever. All right. So the problem with that approach is it's running every single frame, so we need some way of stopping it. Or we just say only do it. Yeah, we could do this. I mean, we could just get really, really basic here for a second and say, oh, give me a quarter of a point for every time I score a point that same way, right? You have to be good at the game to take it.
Well, you could slow it down and make the spaces.
Yeah, let's figure that out. All right. Yeah, let's try that. Make the gaps really, really wide. So here's how the walls are built. They have the sprites. These are the positioning items. So it's grabbing the x coordinates of the thing itself and the bottom height and subtracting it. I bet this one here is spacing it. This looks to be width, that looks to be height. This must be position because it's top y over there and then the bottom minus 720 there. So let's try bumping that. What direction? Up or down? 600. Let's see what happens. How about that? Oh, we just went the hard mode. Oh man, if you could even get through one of those. Good thing I got 2 special moves. I thought I could even get on one of those. All right. So 900? I guess I don't have to put that. All right. It's a little easier. Look at all those moves I'm acquiring. Okay. So we could get smart here and define a gap height over here. Starts at like 900 was a little big. Let's try 800. I don't know. And now we have a variable, and we can do something like make it harder every single time you get more points. So the game progresses and gets more and more difficult. Let's score. Where do we do that thing? As much as I love that sound, I don't love it right now. Okay. I don't mind that sound. That one I can deal with.
What is inside?
Yeah.
Right there, inside the calc walls.
Okay.
Just put the score, special moves, and the decrease.
Yeah, I like it. So what do we call that? Gap height? Minus. Let's go down like 15. I'm just going to tap into that same logic. If I were smarter, I'll be smarter. It's fine. Good. Oh, you don't want to stop it from getting too small? Fine. Let's see if it just started working. I bet I didn't instantiate this one because I didn't clear that first one. Yeah, that's a good point. Let's look and see what's happening. Yeah, did you see that nudge up just a hair? Kind of cool, right? Yeah, the problem is it's going to get very difficult. Or every time I kill a wall, it gets bumped back up 50 or 30 or something like that. How about that? So now I have to use my specials to succeed in this game. Otherwise, it'll get impossible. And in theory, yep. Look how much bigger those are. But it's going to get tighter. Okay. Yeah, that did get just higher there, right? That's a decent mechanism. Like, you're right, you could set a ceiling on it, but if I don't get enough specials, I'm going to die, so I got to use them wisely. And maybe we set that logic to be a little bit smarter. Like, you know, you can basically break even over time. You don't continually get worse and worse and worse and worse. And we could do that. So instead of it bumping at 30, it bumps at 60 since it decreases 15 or whatever. Or you do make it slightly harder, 59, you know, whatever. Right? And when I use it, man, look how big that's going to be now that I blasted through 2 of them. All right, whatever. It's pretty cool, right? All right, what else do we want to do here? I need some sound every time I fire this special off. Probably a Hadoken, since that's the sound I have. It makes sense, right? Oh, I had a fire sound too. Fireball. That's a better one. Okay. Outputs.sounds. Fireball. Wave. Let's see if that just loads. Oh yeah, did you hear that? Killing those things. Oh, but look, we didn't reset the gap height between every round, so every time I die, if I use them, I can kind of like make that height ridiculous. It makes it a lot easier if you don't have a bottom side of the pillar to fly through. Anyway, so yeah, on a reset, you'd probably want to do, just reset that. Where's that reset? Oh, wrong one. Right here. Yeah, game over. Reset that back to 800, right? There it goes, back to normal. So we could do other things too. Like, it would be cool if I actually like shot out a projectile or something like that to shoot the walls. I'm not going to worry about that for now. They do have this thing happening when you die that it like flashes the screen white. We could probably do that pretty easily. Yeah, there it is. Render game over flash. So anytime I call destroy wall, just do that. And instead of white, we're going to go red, since, you know, fire's red. And I don't know what this means. But I do know that I want that to go for 1 second. Why not? Game tick count percentage to 0. 255 times. Oh, that's a fade effect. That's how long it fades over. Game over at. What does this even do? I have no idea. Game over at equals false. Oh, so that just set true. I'm not really sure how that works. Oh, there we go. Oh, wait. Oh, I froze it and broke it all. That's pretty good. At the name minus doesn't exist on fixed num. Yeah, it wants a value in there. I don't know what value it wants. You see that? What's that? I'm not sure. All right, whatever. I am just going to see what that does. I figured this out earlier. Hold on. Let's see. I made one that was a mod that did some stuff. I had a similar method called destroy or something. Use special. Game.tick count for 90 seconds. That's what I used there. Okay. All right, we'll go 120. 2 second flash. Gotta be quick. Oh yeah, did you see that? It was hardly 2 seconds. But it was red, and that's good enough. Anyway, interesting, right? Yeah, it's really kind of it's really quite cool. So I built this one earlier, just in playing with this stuff. I just did this morning, like as I was putting this together. So this is my Game of Thrones version. Where it has similar premises with ice, obviously, and the Night Kingdom of the So it's kind of cool because they have this like just these publish methods on here where it can deploy to that itch stuff just right away. So what happens is, let me show you one thing real quick. If I call DragonRuby -publish, let's do that one we just built. Oops. Of course. Push samples, DragonRuby. Okay. So it does a couple of things. It's going to compile it all, and it's putting a new build of it in here. And you have these builds, and it just gave me, actually I'm going to delete all of those because those were some old ones in there. Okay, builds. So it gave me a Linux bin file, which is an executable, gave me an exe file, gave me a Mac OS zip file. And if we go into that, this is a OS executable that we can just run. It's all self-contained, no dependencies. And there's our game, right? Maybe. How's that for an answer? How big is that file? 30 megs. Not bad. So the interesting thing about it, though, is check this out. I'm going to show you one more thing. So I just got this working over here where I'm going to run this on, actually I can just run it on this one. That's fine. And then we'll wrap up here. But I can actually add in here metadata for these things and publish it. So I'm going to call this version 1.5 because that seems appropriate. And now when I call publish on that same Flappy Dragon that we just did, it'll actually push it to this itch.io has this butler program, which is basically just a transport program. Think of it as a, you know, command line interface for itch. But what it did is it just pushed this up to this itch.io. And now, actually, I'll just pull up their little thing. I can come here to my creations. Here's the Flappy Dragon mod. And we can see that it just pushed a new version of it 28 seconds ago. I can share this URL. I don't have it published to the world, but I could just as easy. Let's see here. I don't know this interface that well. I'm new to this whole thing, but that's okay. Okay, there's a new build, blah, 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 blah. There we go. Here's my Flappy Dragon. Yeah, there it is. So with this link, any of you could just grab this on your machine and now play that game that we just wrote right there. So there it is. There's that same binary. And you could just go straight in and play that. Oh, of course, Apple likes to keep me safe because I haven't signed that. Or maybe I have. Signed by ainben.itch.io. I'm not sure. It's by an unidentified developer. But let's open it anyway because, you know, I don't really trust that guy, but anyway, and that's it, just running, right? Like, pretty cool. And I flash, I guess I disabled my music. Oh, you know why that thing was probably so big? Because I did have a bunch of music in there, even if I didn't use it or not. Anyway. So that's pretty cool, right? Or similarly from this itch thing, which is like, you know, this. Yeah, exactly. I can just launch it right there, just like I would with Steam or something. Yeah, that's my awesome Game of Thrones one. Anyway, it's pretty cool, right? Like, that's actually kind of portable. Like, you know, granted, it's this itch thing I've never seen before, but, you know, they're working on ports to, like, the Raspberry Pi thing, just making a, again, they have a Switch one, but that's all closed source, right? You have to go through the whole Nintendo development process, and I don't know what that means. If you have to pay them money to register to be a Nintendo developer, I don't know. I know on PlayStation you have to buy a dev box and do it there, and it's a pricey little box, you know. I don't know anything about the Switch one. But anyway, it's pretty cool. So that's it. I'll go ahead and wrap up there as far as like what I wanted to kind of go over and show. It is a full game engine. You could do whatever you wanted on it. Again, I just tapped into the Flappy Bird one they had just so that we could figure out how to use their common elements in a meaningful way. You know, we built some new features into it. Flappy Bird got better once a dragon could destroy walls, but maybe you could add levels and you could add difficulties and you could speed up gravity or slow down gravity or put more pillars closer together or whatever, right? Sky's the limit, or create a mini game inside of it that, you know, once you get to 20 points, then you have to win tic-tac-toe. Let's combine our ideas here. or like Pong. Yeah, exactly. You know. But yeah, that's kind of it. So that's what I liked about it. Like I said, Gosu is another cool one, totally open source, totally free, all of that. But you have to install dependencies on your machine to run it, and that doesn't work well if I want to do this with my kid and get him to run it on his own machine, you know, or whatever, right? Or do, anyway, that's what I really like about it is it's quite promising. Supposedly, Ruby Motion as a project in its entirety is moving towards this format. I do know that it uses mruby underneath the scenes right now, and that's how it, you know, compiles Ruby into a executable C function that can be, you know, create a standalone executable without any dependencies, right? I'm pretending to speak intelligently about something that I've only known for a few days, but anyway, like, it's kind of cool, right? Yeah. thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? Share the link to that thing that we just did in our Slack meetup. Oh, there we go. See, look, Tad wanted to be here. He's been playing with this thing. There is a key held event. And anyway, he just posted to a blog post that's kind of their plans for Ruby Motion as a whole, detangling it all, adding better support for Android, turning the whole thing into DragonRuby. Anyway, it's a bigger project to cross-compile C down to executables is what it sounds, or whatever, Ruby down to executables is what it sounds like. So, but yeah, I shared that link. Feel free to check it out. Like, you know, you can download that and play with it. Flappy Dragon in its own right. They're selling it right now for $40. Two indie guys trying to find a reason to get paid to write this thing. So anyway, the biggest complaint out there is that it's not free. Like all good open source leechers, we want everything to be free, right? So maybe there's a candidate for what you were talking about earlier, right? But anyway, I didn't have any problem, you know, supporting them and trying it. It's pretty interesting. You know, that's one thing that I've learned. The more and more I got into software, my hesitancy to buy software and support developers really has decreased. Like, I have no problem supporting people who have spent several months writing something that made it that simple for us to explore this together, you know? So yeah, again, that's kind of it as far as I'm going to go over into the presentation. You know, it's pretty cool. Like, I like it. I'll continue to play around a little bit more with it. If any of you guys end up doing it, you know, end up trying it or looking into it or know somebody, whatever, get them in touch with me because I just want to explore it more. And like we did today, like you guys came up with ways of doing things that I wouldn't have even thought of. You know, let's set a modulo on the time to create an auto loop function, right? And let's try doing that same thing to augment our score to take into account that we need the cyclical nature of it all, right? Like, it's interesting. So anyways, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and close it there and stop that recording. Any other questions or comments about it? Thoughts? Interesting?
Yeah, very cool.
Cool. Good enough. Yes, so they have this whole, so question was, is there a place where they post code? Actually, I'll go ahead and screen share this once more. I literally just stopped it. So they actually are just selling this whole thing on itch itself. They're really tapping into that. There's a community thing here where people have been doing just things in the forum. So between the forum community there and the Slack stuff with the Ruby in Motion group, there's a game dev channel. A lot of people have been posting the things that they've been doing in there. That's all I got so far. What I do understand is good documentation is very near to be shipped. There are some debug functions as that as well. I can tap into the shell and look around in my environment like one would expect out of any Ruby, IDE type of a thing. But I think that's the best we have so far is just kind of, I haven't seen more than that. Oh, somebody did start a screencast site for this whole thing. Let me find out where it was. It was kind of interesting. Sorry, say that again. Yeah, Lori did. Thank you.
Your sense of the size of the community?
Very, very small. I think it just started 2 weeks ago. What? Yeah, now that was the entire Ruby Motion community on there. And so, yes, there's 900 people in Ruby Motion and of so 110 in game dev, but game dev predated DragonRuby because you could do game dev in Ruby Motion in its own right? So that's a fair question. Less than 110 on Slack? No, I don't know. It's still pretty small. The channel is very active. Like, yeah, there you go. This channel's been silent for so long. I'm really happy to see so much activity here these days, right? So anyway, it's still small. The nice thing about it still being small is you can actually interface with the main guy who's building it. So like I was asking this guy questions about his Raspberry Pi thing earlier, and he's like the main dude who wrote it, right? So it's still that small, you know? What was I going to point out? Oh yeah, that screencasting site. Lori Olson. Where did that go? I think I saw it in. They had another page that wasn't this. It was the one I first started at. 1 second. DragonRuby. Oh, yeah, this is where I first saw it. It was way back on Reddit, I think. No, that's not where I saw it. What was it again? Thank you. I've been there once before, so that sounded familiar. Hold on. She's actually in here talking. She was talking about it. Thank you. There you go, DragonRuby Game Toolkit tutorial. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I'll post this as well. I was going through it the other day, just watching her videos explaining it all. It was pretty cool. Did you know about her through this or through Ruby Motion or just through this podcasting community? That's cool. Cool. Tad is watching the live stream and provided it for me, so I appreciate that. Okay. All right, cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop that there. Again, there's a few people in our local meetup who are just getting into it as well. So yeah, I know both me and Tad, who's listening, would love to connect with other people who are playing with it because, you know, it's kind of fun. So anyways, yeah. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'm going to close that there. Thank you. Cool. And then, yeah, you're welcome to continue discussion on community stuff, or if people want to take a break and leave, you can do that as well.